The snow fell hard that morning, painting the broken wooden fences of the little western town in shades of grey and silence. The air carried the bitter sting of poverty and judgment, a place where everyone knew everyone, and no secret stayed buried for long. Sarah Whitmore, a young widow with 3 sons, stood in front of the general store, with her head held high, despite the biting wind that clawed at her face. Her coat was worn, her gloves thin, but her spirit refused to bend. Behind her, her boys, Henry, the eldest at 12, brave and quiet, Samuel, 10, curious but cautious, and little Peter, 7, clutching a broken toy horse, stood in a line, their eyes tired yet hopeful. They had come for work, for mercy, for a chance to live another day. Sarah had lost her husband, Thomas, 2 winters ago to a mining accident. Since then, she had cleaned homes, mended clothes, and even chopped wood to feed her children. But no one in town wanted to hire a woman burdened with 3 mouths to feed. She should remarry, they whispered. She brings bad luck, some said. And when she approached Mr. Green, the storekeeper that morning, the coldness in his voice cut deeper than the frost. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore," he said, turning the sign on the door from open to closed. "I don't need extra help. The town's quiet and business is slow." Sarah could see through his words. He didn't want to risk gossip by hiring her. She stood there in silence, her breath turning white in the freezing air. "Please, Mr. Green," she pleaded softly, her voice trembling but not breaking. "I'll work for half the pay, just enough to buy some flour and coal. My boys—" "I said no," he interrupted sharply, avoiding her eyes. The door clicked shut, leaving her and her sons alone on the icy street. The youngest tugged her sleeve. "Mama, are we going to be all right?" She knelt, brushing the snow from Peter's hair. "We always are, my love," she whispered, forcing a smile. But deep inside, her heart ached. The streets of the town were lined with whispers and pity. Everyone saw her struggle, but no one reached out a hand. As she walked down the muddy road, she noticed a tall man loading hay into a wagon near the church. His hat was tilted low, his coat dusted with frost, his hands rough from years of labor. His name was Jack Lawson, a widower, a quiet man known for keeping to himself since his wife died giving birth to their daughter, Lily. The townsfolk respected him but never really spoke to him. He was a man of few words and deep eyes that carried their own sorrow. Sarah passed by, trying not to draw attention, but Jack looked up and saw the exhaustion on her face, the trembling of the children behind her. He watched as she stumbled slightly, catching her balance while clutching Peter's hand. Something in that moment, the sight of a mother refusing to fall, and stirred something deep inside him. He approached slowly. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, his voice deep and kind. Sarah hesitated. "We're fine, thank you." But her voice betrayed her. It cracked, soft and fragile. Jack looked at the boys, their thin coats barely shielding them from the cold. "I sure don't look fine," he said, placing down a sack of grain. "Where's your home?" She hesitated again. "Just outside town. Old Miller's barn." Jack frowned. "That place barely has a roof." "It's shelter," she said simply. He nodded quietly, then reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small bag. "Take this. Bread and some jerky." Sarah shook her head. "I can't accept charity." "It ain't charity," Jack said softly. "It's kindness, and sometimes that's all we got left in this world." Their eyes met for a moment, 2 souls scarred by loss, bound by quiet strength. Sarah took the bag, her hands trembling slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson." He nodded once and turned to leave, his boots crunching through the snow. But as he walked away, he stopped. The wind howled between the wooden buildings, and the church bell echoed faintly in the distance. He turned his head slightly and said, "Mrs. Whitmore, I lost someone too, my wife. Folks stopped seeing me the same after that." Sarah looked at him, surprised. Jack gave a faint smile. "They called me cursed once. So if they call you the same, well, I guess that makes 2 of us." For the first time that winter, Sarah felt something other than fear. She felt seen. That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, she whispered to her boys as they huddled near a flickering lantern, "Sometimes the ones who understand our pain are the ones who've walked through their own fire." The next morning, the town woke to the sound of horses and the smell of smoke. Jack Lawson's farm had caught fire during the night. He'd managed to save his daughter, Lily, but the barn and most of his supplies were gone. Sarah heard the news from a passing neighbor and didn't think twice. Wrapping her shawl tight, she gathered her boys and hurried toward the Lawson farm. The scene was grim. Black smoke curled up into the pale sky, and the ground was covered in ash. Jack stood silently, watching the wreckage, his face lined with exhaustion. His little girl clung to his leg, crying softly. Without a word, Sarah approached and placed her hand on his arm. "You don't have to face this alone," she said. Jack looked at her, surprised. "You've got your own troubles, Sarah." "Maybe," she said, but pain shared is pain halved. Her sons began helping without question. Henry gathered unburnt wood, Samuel fetched water, and Peter comforted Lily with his toy horse. Jack watched them, speechless, as the widow and her children worked side by side with him. By evening they had cleared part of the debris, and Sarah prepared a simple meal from what little she had brought. As they sat around the small fire, Lily laughed for the first time in days. The sound of her laughter mixed with the crackling flames, and for a moment the world didn't. 3x3 tea seemed so cruel. Jack glanced at Sarah as she comforted Lily, his eyes softening. "You know," he said quietly, "the town's been whispering again. They say I should find someone new. Someone who doesn't carry the kind of weight I do." Sarah gave a tired smile. "They said the same about me, that I should find someone who could save me. But I don't want saving. I just want someone who'll walk beside me." Jack nodded slowly, staring into the fire. "So do I." Silence hung between them, heavy but peaceful. The wind blew softly through the burnt timbers, carrying away the smell of smoke and sorrow. Weeks passed. Together they rebuilt the barn, shared meals and mended broken fences. The townsfolk watched, at first with gossip, then with quiet admiration. The widow and the single father, two souls the world had cast aside, had found strength not in pity, but in partnership. One Sunday, as the church bell rang and the children played in the yard, Jack turned to Sarah. "You know, they used to call me cursed," he said with a faint smile. "Now they call me blessed." Sarah laughed softly. "Guess blessings and curses depend on who you stand beside." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Mrs. Whitmore, maybe it's time you stop being alone." She met his gaze, eyes shining with tears. "And maybe it's time you stop pretending you are." In that small, snow-covered town, two broken hearts learned that love wasn't about finding perfection. It was about finding understanding in the ruins. As the camera pans upward, the scene fades into the golden glow of the setting sun, a promise of new beginnings. Narrator's voice, soft and emotional. If this story touched your heart, remember, kindness costs nothing, but it can change everything. Subscribe for more stories that warm your soul and remind you that hope still lives, even in the coldest winter.